Welcome back into the B-Sides of Sports Season 3, Episode 9. Just before we get started, I wanted to thank everyone for the support on the TikTok as well as the YouTube Shorts that we've just recently rolled out. And by the way, if you haven't seen those before, the link is down below in the description. And we just want to say we appreciate the support on those. And as well as that, as always, the Spotify link is down below in the description. Just wanted to make sure everyone was aware, and the whole playlist for Season 3. So if you enjoy this, please feel free to go down and listen to some past episodes, as well as check out our new social medias. But anyways, now getting into the main meat of the podcast today, starting with the NFL, it was a pretty messy week. Vegas probably made a lot of money, if I had to guess, because it was a lot of rain and ugly football this weekend, and I think that was a byproduct of the weather. But Wilson, to open up, we're starting at a game that was a downpour for most of it, both points and rain-wise, and that is the Jets-Texans. Wilson, what were kind of your thoughts looking about this game? And I know you also said you had something specifically on Zach Wilson.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head with the weather. This was a dreary day of football, and we saw that kind of captured by the 0-0 first half start. But in the second half, we kind of saw the Jets hit a gear that we haven't seen them hit all year, and that was really Zach Wilson, and that offense was finally able to generate some yardage, both in the air and on the ground downfield. And to me, that was really exciting to see. And I'll start with the Zach Wilson point here. I just really enjoy seeing a young person mature. We talked about this aspect with Baker a lot earlier in the season, and mature to a point where they both realize, and not just in the things that they say, but the way they carry themselves. And we've seen Zach Wilson really evolve in his post-game pressers. He had that infamous game where the offense really struggled to generate any type of points. He asked if, he was asked if he thought the blame should fall on the shoulders of that offense, and he just kind of straight up said no. And I thought that really marked the turning point, because since then, Zach's PR has been great. And again, you can say that it's just the things that he's saying, but I think the way that his teammates have kind of supported him and the support he has by the coaching staff leads me to believe that with the limited talent we've seen on the NFL field, there is a belief around him in that locker room just because of his character and kind of the person that he's matured into. And a great second half, over 200 yards, 2 touchdowns. And the Jets were surprisingly good on third down. For the day, they only converted about 40% of those third downs, but that's a rate that's been better for them for much of this season. And for a team that had 10 touchdowns on offense over their first 12 games, having 3 in the second half of this one is just mind-blowing to me to kind of see that fall in together. And they really just got clicking on all cylinders. I will say the Texans are going through a really late version of the injury bug right now. Obviously, the NFL peaking at the right time, had a lot of unfortunate injuries come down over the last couple of weeks, as well as, we saw CJ Stroud with the maybe not concussion. It's a tough situation for the Texans. Obviously, they're fighting for that playoff positioning, but I just really wanted to capture how happy I was for the Jets. The organization's been in disarray for a lot of the past couple of years, and the Rodgers situation has brought a lot of the national spotlight into ways that are not necessarily revolved around football. And so for me, it was just really cool to see the guys on the offensive, particularly for the Jets, really get to celebrate their best performance of the season.
No, I agree. And to first touch on the Jets, like you did, I've been very outspoken about how I really like when a guy can mature and just, accept that how he acted in the past or was acting in the more recent past, can just accept that, he has, I don't know if it was Zach Wilson sitting down and looking at himself or his parents or friends, support system, but I also think Aaron Rodgers might have helped that. And for as much crap as we give him, you just look at them, they obviously have a very good relationship. Aaron Rodgers is very outspoken about how he thinks Zach Wilson has a career in this league, a good career. And it doesn't just, and Aaron Rodgers is not one to just kind of talk, he believes everything he says, even if it's crazy, and that's his whole thing. He's him always 100% to a T. So I think, honestly, I want to give Aaron Rodgers some credit for that, because this game, especially the way it was called in the second half, looked a lot more like almost again, like young Aaron Rodgers. I'm not at all comparing Zach Wilson to it, but it was a lot of getting Zach Wilson moving, letting him make throws, that he was making at, that impressed us all at the combine and at his pro day. That was the stuff Zach Wilson is special for, is, those improvisational plays, but their O-line has been so bad and their receiving talent isn't necessarily fantastic. I will say, I do think the young core of Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson, and then throwing a little more of a veteran player in Tyler Conklin, I think that is a very interesting big three for them. And if they can add some talent around that, I think they really have something special there. Sorry about that. My dog was just shaking on the bed, but I really think, Aaron Rodgers can be the quarterback for the next 2 or so years, and then Zach Wilson can kind of become the Jordan Love of the Packers. I think that's a perfect situation for the Packers. And then on the Texans side, I just want to say we finally got to see, like, I saw someone on TikTok say, this is what Bryce Young deals with every day, just relenting. That Jets defense played, again, it wasn't CJ Stroud playing bad, in my opinion, as more of, a lot of his weapons are hurt. Obviously, Nico Collins went down in that game. Tank Dell went down a few weeks ago, but they still have very talented players, guys like John Mechie and Noah Brown I really like. Obviously not nearly as good as Nico Collins and Tank Dell, but still solid players. And to see him struggle as much, that Jets defense, they had a key on him, right? And this is something you see with young quarterbacks. Carson Wentz was an MVP candidate through 8 games his rookie year. And then once teams started to get a read on him, started to figure him out a little bit, they start baring their fangs and forcing him to do things he doesn't like. And for CJ Stroud, that was getting him moving. I mean, it felt like every play he had to be trying to avoid pressure. And obviously, I'm hoping he recovers because his rookie season, I actually have a bet on him to win MVP because what he's done this year is just unprecedented for a rookie. So my hat's off to him, and I hope he can recover. But again, Jets just were the better team all game. I don't know if the rain helped them, but it just not every play. It seemed like the Jets were ahead of the Texans.
Yeah, it felt like one of those games where you almost don't want to take too much away from the Texans, obviously just given a lot of the injuries and just the way the game was unfolding. It felt like it was one of those days where the Jets were just clicking on all cylinders on both sides of the ball. And so I wouldn't necessarily call it an anomaly, but I do think, I wouldn't necessarily just sell all of my Texan stock because of that performance. Real quickly, the thing I wanted to add to what you were saying about Zach Wilson is I love the point about kind of, his ability to improvise. And there was a play where he rolled out to his left, spin, classic Zach Wilson, what we saw pre his time in the NFL. And he threw a dart into the middle of the field, and it was into double or almost triple coverage. I think it was to Conklin. And that play, he was just playing with such a freeness, right? And I think there was an element of, I've already been benched as the starter once by this team this year. Like, so what if it happens again? I'm just going to go out there and play the way I play. And you're right. I think the play calling was in his favor a lot more design like RPO and things of that nature. But I really like seeing that. It was really fun to see kind of an old school Zach Wilson performance, which is weird to say given how young he is. But overall, this was a game that evolved into a lot of fun for me after that first half where I wasn't sure if we were going to see any points on the board.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I just think my last thing again is it's like the New York media is notoriously one of the most toxic media entities in the world for sports, especially, and it's just such a culture of bringing players down. Look at Daniel Jones. I mean, that's a man who also looks defeated due to the media coverage he's been getting. And so I just think, for Zach Wilson, I don't know what it is. I don't know if he's just, not paying attention to all of that and, taking the Aaron Rodgers route of just being yourself. But I hope it keeps up because, I'm never rooting against someone in the NFL. I want all these guys to succeed. And I think that's something we've kind of stressed on this podcast, is more than anything, this is these guys' lives that we're all just, taking jabs at him. So I was happy to see him, like you said, get back to his old self, which is crazy to say considering he's in his early 20s. But still, it was a very exciting game, I think, for Jets fans as well as NFL fans alike. And then moving into our next game, we go into a similar one-way game, and that was the Eagles and Cowboys. Obviously, this was the night game, and while a lot of people were anticipating a little bit more of a close game, I think there was a lot of interesting things that happened in this game. I don't think the stat sheet necessarily, the score shows it all. Wilson, where would you like to take us to start?
Yeah, I think these game of the weeks are always interesting, right? We're always hoping for a candidate for game of the year. And oftentimes, even if the game itself isn't necessarily a blowout, we're just disappointed by the end result if it isn't one of those where it comes down to a game-winning drive. And, obviously, I think what sticks out is Dallas's offense was rolling in the first half, as they have been at home. You've been big on that point all year. And Dallas just continued their home dominance on the offensive side of the ball. It's really interesting early in the stage. Earlier in the year, a lot was made about their struggles in the red zone, and that has obviously gone away over the last couple of weeks. They've been converting at an astronomical rate down in that red zone, particularly at home. And to me, the Eagles secondary continues to be a problem. This wasn't necessarily a performance where Dak came out and just lit them up, but their unable to get key stops at key points in the game. And then the Eagles offense to me has been a little bit more concerning than the defense too, because, the offense had run like such a well-oiled machine over the last year and a half or so. And we've really seen some splits in that, they've gone away from the power run a little bit. Their backs aren't as effective as they have been in the past. And I think there's a lot of reasons that it could come down to. I don't want to give fatigue as too much of a reason, but obviously the Eagles are coming off this gauntlet of a stretch against many of the top teams in both of the conferences. So I think there is an element of, just kind of getting burnt out, having to get up for every single one of these kind of marquee matchups. So you know how big the Eagles are on the main stage in the NFL. Overall, to me, this one felt a little bit like that Niners-Seahawks game we had on Thanksgiving, where the fumble touchdown gave a little bit of hope to the Eagles, in my opinion. It felt like might be able to string together a couple sequences and get themselves back in the game, but ultimately Dallas was able to protect the lead late. Took this one going away.
I think I just kind of want to expand on your take about, again, this kind of just looks like them finishing their gauntlet and they're crawling to the finish line. 3 fumbles by your 3 best players is something that's almost a trifecta of things that will never happen in an NFL game. That's so rare. And the Cowboys aren't exponential at forcing fumbles. They're always a pretty good team in terms of interceptions and forcing pass breakups, but fumbles aren't necessarily their thing. So to see that was pretty wild to me. And it really did just feel like a team defeated. And just kind of building on the Eagles, this is something we talked in text about during the game. Is usually we save most of our conversation for here, so it's more genuine. But sometimes, we'll have some quick conversations, and we were just talking about the Eagles' identity was, in my opinion, it was a masterful scheme with Shane Steichen and when Gannon was there. So they knew their defense had a lot of speed. So they tried to get on top of the quarterback fast. Then Von Hargrave leads in free agency. And they get a guy like Jalen Carter, who's fantastic. But the secondary is old and they break down quick. If the pressure isn't getting there quick, it just seems like the secondary is struggling in the back end. And again, they did get Kevin Byard, which I think has helped a little bit, but still not what you want to see out of a team that was just in the Super Bowl. And going into back to the offense, Steichen obviously leaves for Indy. What the Eagles did so well, Jalen Hurts throws one of the best go balls in the league. AJ Brown and Devonta Smith, both those guys were benefiting from his just beautiful deep balls that he threw, and they're getting away from that. And what used to help that, and they would get those single coverage to throw those go balls, is the run game. But the core of DeAndre Swift, Kenneth Gainwell, and Boston Scott is just doing absolutely nothing for them right now in terms of establishing the run. I think all of those backs are good in their own right. I just don't think, for whatever reason, they aren't committing to the run. Only 23 attempts while averaging almost 5 yards per attempt is just a little crazy to me. And I know Jalen Hurts was a lot of success on that. And that's another thing, they've gone away from his designed runs. And I understand that he's your franchise guy, just like how Lamar has a lot of these running QBs. It's pretty common for once they get 2, 3, 4 years in the league, you kind of go away from that. Once you're about to pay them the big contract, it's like you go away from that because now you have $40 million, $50 million attached to them. So I think that might be part of it, but also it's just like what Jalen did so well was, this run pass run option, where he was either you hand it off for the run, you make the pass, or he could run for it. They've gotten away from that as well. It just seems like what made this team great, they've gotten away from. And meanwhile, Dallas has found what makes this team great is sort of this combination of feeding CeeDee Lamb as well as, having scripted plays on play action for other talent. Brandon Cooks has had a lot of big games, but it's always on like 5 catches because Dak also throws a really good deep ball. And so they're taking advantage of, CeeDee Lamb gets all the attention. That first drive he had like, I think it was like him and Tony Pollard had all of the catches on the first drive. So like, who they're throwing to. So then that's when they start to hit plays to Jake Ferguson. He came on really late into that game. Rico Dowdle is someone I've been very outspoken about how I think he's better than Tony Pollard. He's also been fantastic for him. So I think that's what helps this 2-back system again, because where Tony Pollard hasn't done what I think everyone thought he was going to do, Rico Dowdle has come in and really surprised a lot of people. The Dallas offense has reinvented itself this year in a way that benefits how they play and what their O-line's good for. And again, sort of what Dak is good for, while the Eagles have gone away from it. And that's, I think, the story of these two teams this year, where the Eagles have had to win all of these games ugly because they struggle to find their identity until late in games when they're just letting Jalen Hurts sling it. Dallas has found the opposite, where they're averaging over 40 points a game over their last 4 games. It's just 2 completely different teams being run. And again, they both sit at 10-3, but while I don't think the outlook is bleak for the Eagles, I just think Dallas right now has a lot higher of a ceiling, which in my opinion just shouldn't be the case with how well the Eagles played last year.
Absolutely. And, I think that's really cogent analysis there. I think you really outlined kind of the core roots of these teams and what's allowing them to be successful and facing struggles in the Eagles case. I have two quick footnotes on this one. The first, just with your point about the Eagles, and you had made this point to me earlier before the podcast, but the departure of both their OC and their DC, I think, we don't want to overstate how important that can be, right? When you build your culture and your identity around a team, losing two major pieces of it, and in the NFL's case, this is just a matter of checks and balances, right? Obviously, the Eagles had performed very well, so obviously teams like the Cardinals and the Colts are going to go out and try to get guys that were behind that masterclass of the season the Eagles put together last season. But you really see that kind of in the loss of some of that collective identity, right? Where I think the Eagles are still trying to figure out what this version of the Eagles is going to be, because it is different personnel. It is different people in that locker room. And then the second footnote I just wanted to add on to here is what an incredible kicking performance from Brandon Aubrey. Obviously, 2 field goals of over 49 yards, the first time in NFL history. And I saw a lot of people quickly labeling him as, the best kicker in the NFL right now. I don't necessarily know if that's the case. Justin Tucker's obviously still up there, and people have made a lot of comments about, his effectiveness from 50 plus, but a lot of those have been blocked. So it's more of a field goal unit breakdown than it is just Tucker not making the kick. But it is just, again, it's one of those really cool stories in the NFL, and I'm with you. I'm always rooting for these guys to succeed. Aubrey's a guy that, wasn't on a team a couple years ago, coming out of college, like just, he was a soccer player, wasn't even a kicker. And so that was just a really cool story to see to me that, he's now one of the most effective long field goal kickers in the league. And I think he's perfect on the season, right? So really cool story there.
Well, and again, I'm not taking a knock at him here, but I don't think anyone has had more practice at kicking this year than him, considering how the Cowboys score what seems to be 80 points every week. So, but no, It is impressive. But I think that's kind of the thing we've seen is, a lot of these teams that are kind of doing well because of, as we've talked about all year, the passing numbers being so down. I think kickers have kind of re-stressed their importance. Let alone last night's game, the Dolphins miss a kick. They lose the game because of that, in essence. The Giants won on a kick late in the game. And as we said, obviously Dallas having a good kicker, as well as, teams like the Falcons having Young Wei Koo has been very beneficial for them. The Colts signed Matt Gay this year after having kicking struggles after Adam Vinatieri signs. And now they're in the playoffs with a backup quarterback. I just think, again, not to say, kickers are the most important position, but I think they've kind of been undervalued over the last few years, especially since, I think it was emphasized after they moved the kicking line from the goal line to the 15-yard line, making it 33 yards for an extra point. But I think, like you said, I think he is a big part of this Dallas success is him, he's in rhythm. And again, kicking as much as he is every game, it just seems like he gets a really good rhythm going every game. So very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And with that, we will go to our last game, which was probably, I'd say, the most exciting game of the week in terms of, really just down to the wire, close most of the game. And that was the Ravens-Rams. Wilson, what were kind of your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, this one was a really fun one. Obviously turned out into a shootout, and we saw the Ravens take it away in OT. But I think the idea of the West Coast visiting an East Coast team or the East Coast visiting a West Coast team is always very interesting, right? It, changes players' routines to an extent. Obviously, they're in a different time zone. And when you're making a time zone switch of that much, it's three full hours. I think it does play a factor in just how well these players go about preparing their bodies. So kind of looking at the, at the line before the game, I thought 7.5 was a bit much. I think Vegas has done a good job of trying to capture that value. And to me, this is a Rams team that had been rolling coming in, and this is a Ravens team that often finds ways to open up backdoor covers for teams. So I thought 7.5 was a bit much. But that being said, obviously this one lived up to, I wouldn't necessarily say the hype, but just a really strong matchup here with the Ravens being atop of the AFC and the Rams really fighting to get their way into this playoff. We saw really strong passing performances by both teams. That was a little interesting to me. I wasn't really expecting a passing shootout here, but I think on the Rams side, the Cooper Kupp's really come on strong as of late. He struggled getting back into the game early on in the season. And I think the two-man tandem of him and Puka Nacua, when that Rams O-line is able to hold up, it really is a fun passing game to watch. Kyron Williams is one of my favorite players in the league right now. I just love the way he runs the ball. And I also just love the way he's able to be a pass catcher for them as well. Obviously not super effective out of the backfield. Catching, this last weekend, but super fun performance for me from the Rams. The Ravens, I think you and I have talked a lot about just the concerns on whether or not how effective they're going to be on the offensive side of the ball. And this one answered some of the questions. Obviously, they're still utilizing a pretty spread run game between Mitchell, Edwards, and Lamar. But, I think the Ravens, this was important for them to find a way to win this one. Sitting atop the AFC right now, this is one that you had to have because it's going to put them in a really good position to win the 1 seed. I think the Ravens, to me, in a wide open AFC, are in the best position they've been in over the last couple of years to truly contend for the Super Bowl.
No, I agree. I think that's interesting. I think, there's a few issues on this team, mainly to me being still drops are an issue, as well as Mark Andrews being out, but they said there is a outside chance that he could play if come playoff time, which would be huge for them because him and Lamar really do have great chemistry. But I also think this has allowed sort of a emergence of Isaiah Lakely, which can be great for them. And going over to the Rams, it's so funny to me that the line was that much because I think we sometimes forget how good Matt Stafford is, right? Because he still is, again, one of the greats of the 2000s. And you throw in Kyron Williams, which, like you said, a very talented back who I think is underrated. I'd say he's probably top 10 in the NFL right now. Maybe the best tandem in Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua in the league right now. And it really is just a team that has all the offensive firepower. Oh, yeah, and then just throw in the best defensive player ever in Aaron Donald. Except something that's so funny to me is I think Lamar is the only player who has successfully gotten into Aaron Donald's head, and Aaron Donald hasn't been able to overcome that. Still has never sacked him, and I don't even think he had a tackle. Yes, and again, I get that the Rams understand, they double team him every play they get the opportunity to, like most teams do, but still, I just thought that was a funny stat they keep throwing around. And really just my last thing, too, is I think the rain, you talked about how this was an ugly slate and you didn't think it was going to be pass heavy. The DBs were having a lot of issues with footing. A lot of the touchdowns were broken coverages and people falling, and I think the rain was playing a part of that. Demarcus Robinson, for the game-tying field goal, the go-ahead field goal late in the game, got into position because Marlon Humphrey just slipped. I mean, seriously, that is all that happened. It wasn't a broken coverage. He just fell. And then he was able to get out of bounds and get the Rams in field goal before the Ravens would inevitably tie the game. But still, I think that was kind of the reason for it. Because like you said, both of these teams, in my opinion, are two of the better teams at running the ball. Obviously, the Ravens do it a little more differently. They have that 3-headed beast, while the Rams really has been Kyron Williams show. But I just think, this game was really fun. I honestly don't have much to say about it. I just think this is in my opinion, a great playoff team matchup. I think the Rams, I know they have an outside chance right now, but I know they are in the hunt actively with all the other 6 and 7 NFC teams. So I think it'd be exciting if they could get in, because I think that is a very dangerous team in the right circumstances.
Yeah, and they're aided by some of the other teams that were hovering around that 500 mark faltering, right? Obviously, Green Bay took a loss, and so I think it's like the AFC, except it's kind of flipped, right? We have all those 7 and 6 teams in the AFC right now. I think in the NFC we have all these 6 and 7 teams. The last thing I just wanted to add is I really like your point about the DBs and their footing. It's a real interesting thing, right? Where a lot of times, like, teams that are underdogs want the game to have a little bit more variance, right? Whether that's the weather, just different like external circumstances that are just not on the field. And in this one, I think we saw the variance swing towards the offensive players obviously having the favor, right? Just them knowing exactly what they wanted to do, and the defensive backs with a field that, you can't just get a strong footing on. It obviously offers a lot more variance in that aspect. So I thought that was a really interesting point. I'm going to really like that one. The last thing I'd say about this week's NFL slate is Drake and I partake in a NFL fantasy league, and Drake somehow was sitting at the 8 seed. I was somehow the 1 seed, and Drake absolutely marked me. I think you put up 180 points or something like that. I didn't even meet my projected starting points, and it's one of the greatest 1-8 upsets in fantasy football history for myself. That was a devastating way to end my football weekend.
Yeah, next year I think we'll have to vote on some bye weeks or something, because as much as I love the fact that I'm going to the second round, it doesn't feel really deserved. But I'll be sure to put up the screen grab of that, because that was pretty crazy.
Yeah.
But with that, we will close this segment and go to our B block, where we will once again be talking about the NBA in-season tournament, kind of its effect, as well as some of the things we learned from that tournament. Welcome back into the B-Sides of Sports, and today, once again, we're talking about the in-season tournament, which me and Wilson both have been pretty outspoken on the success of it. And going into now, I think what everyone was talking about recently was the championship game. A pretty good game, not as close as some of the other ones, but again, this was a very young team versus a very experienced team. So as fun as the Pacers run was to watch, I think at a certain point you had to understand, they're still, building a roster, while the Lakers are, again, every year they're competing with the insane talent they have on that roster. So, Wilson, what were kind of your takeaways on this game, as well as, the conclusion to the in-season tournament?
Yeah, again, you and I have harped on this for the last couple of weeks and the last couple of podcasts, but I really think this was a success for the NBA. I think the viewership numbers have started to come out, and they haven't been dramatic, right? I think there's maybe a 24% increase year over year ago viewership, but I think in the grander scheme of things, the NBA right now, where it has become such a global sport, it's the NBA is trying to get touch points, right? So it wants engagement on TikTok. It wants people to be looking at stuff on X or Twitter. It wants people to be watching like shorts and different things of that nature. So I don't necessarily think the success of the tournament is necessarily given by its Nielsen rating, right? I think there's a bigger picture of what the NBA is trying to accomplish in the branding. Because given the marketing they had to do and the courts and all the different changes, who knows if it'll even be a net positive in terms of income. But I think in just growing the brand and putting the NBA, as you like to always point out, the number 2 established sport in the across America, and then global, just the presence it's growing. I think that's more important in the grand scheme of that. On the game itself, obviously you're right. The Pacers, just a younger roster. I think in a game of this magnitude, where really, players talked about all season, these were really starting to feel like playoff games. You really saw the Lakers experience shine through. AD's given this inconsistent label, and while he is that, I think he's consistent defensively and offensively. In the Lakers postseason runs that they've gone deep, whether it was winning the title in 2020 or just even getting to the conference finals this past year, AD has had moments where he has looked like the de facto number 1 option on that roster. He very much was that against the Pacers, 41, 20, and 5 with a couple of blocks. Just a sensational performance from AD, and it allows LeBron, right, in year 20, to have 24 and 11 quietly, and the Lakers are able to take this one going away. On the Pacers side of things, real quickly, I think Halliburton, you just have to love Halliburton, right? So many comments are made about his shot and things of that nature. I think if it goes in, it goes in, right? And the absolute way that Halliburton's able to control just the feel of the game and the flow of that offense is something that we don't see a lot in these modern point guards, right? A lot of these guards are coming in with just insane shooting abilities, and their focus is more on scoring, and kind of not facilitating an offense, maybe, but gathering assists or just designed, whether it's a drive and kick, things of that. Halliburton, to me, really just controls the game with his feel of that offense. It's not just the assisting, right? It's the way he's setting up the offense. It's the way he's calling out plays. It's the way he's making live adjustments out there on the court with his teammates. Halliburton just has been absolutely sensational. In 2011, I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of. Excuse me. He was bound to have a colder shooting night one of these days, and the Lakers have a lot of length. It gives a lot of these bigger guards some problem because they're not used to seeing it on their day-to-day matchups. So I thought it was a really fun tournament. Lakers, their experience definitely shined through. It was cool to see LeBron and the roster as a whole just really gun for the title, if we could call it that. And I thought it was a huge success for the NBA. I've said that so many times, but I can't reiterate it enough.
Yeah, no, I agree. And just kind of some things, again, my notes were, I've been to a few Pacers games this year. I worked a few last year. So I've been, seeing Halliburton quite a bit. And it really does remind me almost of like a not so intense D'Antoni offense with Harden. Whereas like Miles Turner, he does not rebound well for big, in my opinion, because half the time he's sitting on the 3-point line, because what they want to do is, they have so many like insane athletic players, guys like Obi Toppin, Ben Mathurin, guys who really can just go inside the paint. So what they like to do is spread it out. So if Halliburton passes to a shooter who's open, they run a lot of high screens. They can dish to someone down low who can finish inside. Another guy, Bruce Brown, is someone who's gotten pretty good at that. So again, against a team like the Lakers, who have one of the best post defenders in the league, as well as very fast and versatile wing defenders, I just think it was kind of a perfect bad matchup for the Pacers as well. And then something I just want to touch on with the Lakers as well is, Austin Reeves having 28 off the bench. I still think we are going to talk about his deal as one of the most insane things that happened in the last few years. It's like, to me, the Mike Conley trade, the Mike Conley deal in 2016, but the exact opposite. Whereas Mike Conley got a lot of money and benefited from the salary cap, we kind of saw Austin Reeves hurt almost from an increase in salary cap, which is insane. But once again, night in and night out, is proving to be one of the best bench players in the league. And I think soon enough here, I think he's going to get a chance to be a quality starter. And I'm just kind of excited for that, because he really is a very good 2-guard. I mean, he can just score with the best of them, especially considering that he is just a 6-man right now. But yeah. that really, just all throughout the whole tournament, he impressed me. He was the only player, I think, on the bench with over 10 minutes who had a positive net rating this game. And just, I mean, he has such a control for, it just looks like he's playing basketball. Like he doesn't pass a ton, but he's going to get his shots and they're going to be good shots.
Yeah, we'll get over to some of the other teams that were involved in this in-season tournament in just a moment, but I really love that point about Austin Reeves, and it really feels like he's going to find his way back into that starting lineup. The Lakers had kind of underperformed early on in the season, and to me, what I see, it's not like, he's obviously played very well as the sixth man. I don't think that's what's contributed to the success, right? I don't think it was the change in the starting lineup. I just think the entire roster as a whole has elevated their game a little bit. The shooting's gotten a little bit better. Obviously, AD's been rounding into form. We know that LeBron is still playing at a top 10 player in the league level. So I do expect to see him back in that starting lineup because I think the combination of Reddish, LeBron, AD, D'Lo, and Austin Reeves will give that Lakers roster the best chance night in and night out. And they close with that roster a lot of the time anyway. So you often hear it's not who starts, but who closes. That being said, I do expect him to be back in that starting lineup soon here.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then to just carry over, these are some other teams that me and Wilson just kind of thought had interesting showings in the in-season tournament. So starting off, we're going to Phoenix. Wilson, what was kind of your point you wanted to make about them?
Yeah, the Suns have been a challenging roster this year, right? Obviously, they assembled that big three of KD, Beal, and Book, and unfortunately, it's been kind of the story of a lot of these big threes we've seen come together over the last couple of years, and it's health, right? We just haven't seen the three of them out there playing healthy basketball together, and it's a little tough to see. Vogel obviously has been working through managing the roster and the lineups, and I think what is really apparent is the depth isn't there, right? The Suns are having to elevate guys that shouldn't be in the starting lineup to the starting lineup because of just the in and outs of KD, Book, and Beal. And while guys like Grayson Allen's been playing okay, they're just it's a fringe rotation, right? Like they don't really know who's playing night in and night out, and it's disallowing players to find a true rhythm. And again, I think it's hard to place blame on anything other than just the health, right? This is a roster that was expected to revolve around three offensive hubs, right? Like Beal, Booker, and KD, we've all seen them be the number one option on an offense before. You're trying to combine those three, and then I think around the edges, you're just trying to find a little bit of size and a little bit of defense. So I think the connectivity of that roster has really struggled. We saw that in the game against the Lakers, where the Lakers are a team that all year has been documented as really stumbling out of the gate. And ironically, it's Phoenix who couldn't put any points on the board in that, I think it was semifinals matchup. So Phoenix is one of those teams where as the season goes on, I think they have the Warriors upcoming, and most players are expected to be healthy. I'm really excited to see what that healthy version of the Suns looks like, because right now I just don't think we're seeing what's going to be the true roster at the end of the year.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think I just have two real main takeaways here. And that's one, I don't understand this new concept of the big three where all of the guys are usually old. You look at, in my opinion, big threes work when the guys are younger and they're developing, right? I think it's what like OKC could do right now, right? With like SGA, Chet, and then maybe one more. Because the best big three ever, in my opinion, was the Durant, Westbrook, and Harden off the bench. It was the perfect semblance of what a big three was. You always have someone who can score. It gets rid of the issue of, there's only one ball moniker. And, you had a guy who loves to pass in Russell Westbrook. You had a guy who loved to score in Kevin Durant, and a guy who could do both. And what we're seeing with these modern big threes so often is, and it's why I kind of think that the Bucks might work, but again, it's not less of a big three, more of a big two, unless you consider Chris Middleton a big three, but it's just kind of like Clay and the Warriors when they had that. I'm not sure if I consider those guys big three material, right? But anyways, I will say, I've been pretty outspoken about Devin Booker because he's corny and I just think a little overrated. But what I will say is I'm very impressed with his passing this year. He's averaging 8 assists on the year. I don't know if Chris Paul maybe helped him, seeing how a great player really, manages an offense. But I just want to really compliment him. I think a sleeper candidate for MVP if he can meet that number, just because he is capable of being a 30 points per game scorer. And, if you add 8 assists on that every night, that's a very impressive stat line, as well as if, the Suns can kind of pick it up here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. And the passing, right? Some of it's just the osmosis of being with a guy like CP, but this year it's also been out of necessity, right? Just not having a true point guard. With Allen at the other guard spot, I don't know if you'd necessarily call him a true point. Yeah. And so just the necessity has kind of pulled that out, and you love to see that, right? You like to see great players elevate their games and become better, well-rounded players. I also think there's an element of Kevin Durant is probably still the best scorer, right? Just given his size. He's still probably the go-to bucket getter as good as Booker's gotten at that. And so that also allows Booker to put playmaking as more of a priority because some of that offensive juice is taken away by KD.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, I think the next thing we wanted to move on to was the New Orleans Pelicans. And there's been a lot of dialogue about Zion in particular, but kind of just the talent on this roster overall and how good this team should or should not be. Drake, what are your thoughts both on Zion and just the Pelicans as a whole?
So again, I want to say I love Herb Jones. He's just one of the most fun defenders to watch in the league. They have Jose Alvarado, who's another just awesome defender. Jonas Valanciunas is one of my all-time favorite players. He played for the Raptors. He was one of the first draft picks I ever remember with that team. So those are just kind of my quick hitters. And then to go to Zion Williamson, I just think, it's very disappointing, in that Lakers game, right, in the in-season tournament. Again, don't know how they're weighing it, but him only having 13 points and shooting 6 for 8 is kind of discouraging, especially when you consider how high they drafted him and what they thought he would do. Now, I will say, I am critical, and I think he needs to try to take over games more. I'll say it was awesome last night to see him have 36 against the Timberwolves, and almost like it's like he heard the noise and realized, maybe he had a little bit of self-aware moment where he's like, they put so much stock into me, and I have been kind of disappointing. Don't know if it was that or if it was just a good matchup for him, but I was happy to see that because, again, we've seen Zion play basketball since he was like a freshman in high school because he's just one of the most dominant big men, and he can shoot at a fairly well clip. There just wasn't anything he couldn't do, and his body type is so unique. But his body type being so unique has become more of a point of contention than anything. And I think that's just disappointing because, what Charles Barkley did was use his unique build to become one of the most unique players in NBA history. We have never seen a player like him. And it's just because he was such a unique build and mindset. He rebounded so well at 6'6" because he was just, a big guy, and that's kind of what I was hoping to see out of Zion, and we just haven't. So I hope Zion he's so young. These guys come in the league so young. I hope there's a chance, he can figure it out. But it is just, for me, it's disappointing to see the inconsistencies night in and night out. And again, it's the Ben Simmons things. You just question how much of these guys are in for the game. And I completely understand, for some of these guys, it is just a job, and you don't have to be a freak about it. And that's fine, and so if that's the approach you're going to take, I get it. But, you just see Zion dominate and then on other nights he won't. And that's, I think, what's more frustrating to me is it's just like, I don't understand why he doesn't try to, do that as consistently as I think we've seen that he can in seasons like his rookie season.
Yeah, that's an excellent take. I really wholeheartedly agree with everything you outlined there. And, on a production standpoint, his stats are down just a little bit, right? About 23 a game on 58% shooting. The 3-point shooting's at about 33, but he doesn't really shoot the 3-ball a whole lot this year. And then, rebound assisting about 5 and 5. So kind of on par for his career. And I think that's the thing, right? It's almost the Justin Herbert equivalent in the NBA, as to Herbert is with the NFL, right? Where Zion came out with this incredible rookie season. Obviously, injuries plagued a little bit of that. But even in his second year, right, we saw just a fantastic player. And because of that, we always want to project forward, right? We want to project better. And so when Zion's able to go out there averaging almost 30 points a game on 60% shooting from the field, we're like, this guy should be next. And to kind of see him stay as that same player and even become a little bit more inconsistent over the last year or two, I think for us as just fans of basketball wanting to see a high level of play, it becomes a little difficult to stomach. And again, I agree with you. Like if the goal at the end of the day for Zion isn't to be the best basketball player you can be with, there's an extent of like, that's a decision he makes. He's to a degree, he's earned the contract, right? Like, it's hard for us to sit here on our couch or, on our bed and say like, oh, he's got to find a way to be better. But I understand both sides there, right? Like obviously as fans of sports, we obviously just want to see the highest level of play that there can be. So I think Zion continues to just be the big storyline for me. We know BI is kind of established, he is who he is at this point, and CJ, as he ages, I think he's got a game that will age well, but at the same time, he's not nearly as effective the player he was a couple years ago in Portland. So I think the Pelicans as a whole just continue to be a roster where we look at the talent. You mentioned the young defenders and Herb Jones and Alvarado. I want the Pelicans to be established as a true contender, but I just don't think they're there yet.
No, I agree. And then with that, we will go to our last NBA team for the day, and that is the Boston Celtics. Wilson, you said you had a particularly interesting take on them in terms of how they're being officiated this year.
Yeah, I just think the dynamic between the referees and the Celtics, it reminds me a little bit of the Warriors, and that's not a good thing, where it feels like the Celtics are getting kind of a weird whistle. Whether it's fair or not fair, any given night, it just feels like the whistle's going both ways. And I think the inconsistencies are what drive players crazy. But at the same time, I think it's been fascinating and kind of an indictment on the referees to an extent. And I don't love to come for the referees. I understand they have to be a part of the game. But seeing Tatum get ejected a couple weeks ago against the Sixers when the Sixers were playing without Maxey and Embiid and Melton had fouled out of that game, as a fan, a huge fan of the Sixers, I'm wearing an Iverson jersey right now. To see Tatum get ejected in that moment, I was like, that shouldn't have been an ejection. And a couple days ago, we saw it happen to Brown, where Brown was hardly engaging with the referee at all, and he got ejected for the game. And it's just weird for me to see two of these guys that are normally super calm players and truly respectful in their dialogue with the referees get thrown out of games so quickly. And as a whole, the Celtics, the style of play, they do drive to the basket a lot. They are trying to, they are looking for contact, seeking contact, and they should be getting to the foul line quite frequently. To me, I don't think they complain at an astronomical rate compared to what their foul rate should be. And so kind of the short leash has been a little bit interesting to me. I don't know if there's something behind the scenes that is causing like the referees to have maybe an implicit bias against the Celtics, but that is just a quiet storyline that I've been personally monitoring throughout this season because I haven't seen anything like it before. It feels a little bit like CP and Scott Foster, except it's not particular players with particular referees. It's just the roster as a whole. That's been a little interesting for me to see.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I haven't watched many Celtics games this year. In terms of, well, just because I don't like the Boston sports market, to be frank, but, and I know again, like there's certain teams I don't watch a ton of in the regular season because I know Boston's going to be till the Eastern Conference Finals. There's no way they get eliminated before it. They have the most talent of any team in the East on their roster. So I just know I'm going to have to watch them for 3 months in the playoffs. So it's like, I don't need to, mince words in the regular season. But I will say, again, I think, my only guess is, sometimes there are, if certain, we saw it with Detroit in the early 2000s after the Malice at the Palace incident where they were officiated very harshly, them and Indiana after it. The referees and, have come out and said, like, you kind of stand up for each other. So as a fan looking outside in, I just wonder if maybe Boston has done something, to a referee that they saw unfit, and being a union and looking for the betterment of themselves, they have started to officiate these games unfairly. I mean, that's really all I have to say. I don't really, know, and we never will, unfortunately. But I do think that's an interesting situation.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Hadn't considered that, but maybe it's worth doing some research on.
Yep. And with that, this segment will come to a close. And for our last segment of the day, we will be talking about our NFL picks for most improved player.
Welcome back into the B-Sides of Sports. This is our C block today. And like Drake just mentioned, we are going to be talking about a hypothetical most improved NFL players award. So with this, obviously the title is pretty suggestive of what we're going to be talking about. When I was kind of going through my research and my thoughts on this, I had kind of come to guys like Nico Collins and Trent McDuffie, right? We're looking at two units in the Texans offense, as well as the Chiefs defense that have been playing pretty well across the board. And to me, I think, Nico's emergence as a number one receiver has been a large part of that, as well as just McDuffie's emergence in the backfield as just a really strong, in the secondary as a really strong corner paired with L'Jarius Sneed has been really fun for me to see. But Drake has given some extensive thought to this, so I think he's going to walk us through a couple players and why they would be in the conversation for most improved NFL player.
Yeah, for sure. So I'd say two that are a little more conventional, and I have one that I'm almost disappointed that we haven't heard about more because he has just Pro Bowl snub written all over him. But going into this, so my first pick is Baker Mayfield, and I don't think this is too surprising to anyone. I think everyone knows, this is quite the resurgence. I mean, after being pretty turnover prone his last few years in Cleveland, again, he was dealing with a torn labrum that he was playing through to try to contend with his team. Regardless of that, the NFL doesn't really care. He was just labeled as turnover prone, right? So going into that, we go into his last year, right? Playing after leaving Cleveland, he goes to Carolina, and they think he could potentially be the starter. He goes 1-5, throws 6 touchdowns and 6 picks, just struggles across the board. Goes to the Rams, has that really impressive game against the Raiders, where on 2 days of being on the team only, he ended up leading a fourth quarter comeback from like the 5-yard line. Just very impressive. So he kind of showed what he was at his best. And so I think we all knew he would get a chance to contend this year, but I just don't think anyone thought he would run away with it as much as he has. Now, I will say it is Tampa Bay, so he has one of the more talented receiver cores in the league, and the emergence of Rashad White, who I think is again, a very underrated rookie running back. I think, he definitely has a system around him to succeed. But again, if you look at all the great quarterbacks in the league, you need a support system to succeed. Look at a guy like Bryce Young right now. The dude has no help and he's not succeeding, and we're acting surprised. But going into Baker Mayfield's numbers a little bit, what I just think is so impressive is his 20 touchdowns to 8 interceptions ratio, as well as 3,000 passing yards, throwing in with a it would be the second best completion percentage in his career. And he just has looked like a new and improved player, a team that's bought into him. He looks more confident. His quarterback rating's better than it's been in 5 years. He's on pace for the most touchdowns in his career in a season. He's connecting with his receivers well. They're benefiting under him, and they have the worst rushing offense behind him second worst rushing offense in the NFL behind him. And they still are now leading their division at 6-7, but still, I mean, it's awesome to me to see what he's done when given a proper opportunity. Cleveland gave up on him after being the first QB in 20 years to win a playoff game. And I'm almost happy for Baker that they're failing now and he is just seeing a surplus of success, and all of this on an $8 million deal. I mean, my hat's off to him. That's another guy we've talked about a lot. Maturity, I think, is a big part of him becoming a better player and really just blossoming into, again, what I think could be a playoff caliber QB for the next 6-7 years.
Yeah, really loved the Baker Mayfield pick. Everything you outlined there, agree with completely. And the maturity point is really just the one that I wanted to hammer again. He came out out of Oklahoma, right? And a lot was made about whether or not, he's a cocky guy, he was a little arrogant. And I think we're really seeing that confidence benefit him, right? Where kind of it turned a little bit more hubris, right? And he's kind of been able to carry that confidence with just a little bit more of a chip on the shoulder rather than a degree of arrogance. And you really see the locker room behind him, right? The O-line's been outspoken about the strong relationship they have with Baker. The receiver core obviously seems to have a good chemistry with him. So just been a really, really fun season. 6-7 isn't astronomically good, but obviously, in that NFC South, it's good enough. And they will be definitely vying for a playoff spot, and that'll be fun to watch unfold.
No, for sure. And then to go into my next pick, I think this is a little more unconventional, but I just think it's because it's, again, from a smaller market team, and that is Michael Pittman of the Colts. Now, what he's doing isn't reinventing the wheel by any means, but there's been a lot of concerns about if he could be the Colts' number one. And as we've seen, with a lot of these guys, is they get that next contract pretty early into their fourth year once they're eligible. Michael Pittman was not offered one. The Colts said they wanted to see him play out because after having a dip in production last year, a noticeable dip with the whole team, they wanted one more year with him. And so now what they're getting is proof that he can be a number one receiver. And like I've brought up, I told Wilson, I said, he's one of the best short yardage receivers in the league, which is such a weird title, but with his 6'3", 210-pound frame, he's just built for it. But he's on pace right now for a career high in receptions, career high in yards, career high in touchdowns, career low in drops. And as all of this just attributes to a guy who is finally taken the next step, and all of this with a backup quarterback. It's Gardner Minshew's throwing the ball to him, and he still is just turning into this, always reliable guy. Last year, he'd kind of seen an issue with drops. The last 2 years, he had 6 drops in both after only having one his rookie year, which was really discouraging. And he draws a lot of penalties for being a receiver, a lot of holdings, a lot of false starts. It was very frustrating as a Colts fan because I saw his potential, but he just never was, in my opinion, living up to it. And this year, he showed me what I kind of thought he would be, from the get-go. And that is one of the more reliable, 1,300 yards, 10 touchdowns type of player. And I just think that's really what he's become. He also already has his most yards after catching a season ever, and we still have 4 games to go. So I just wanted to give him his flowers, and he probably won't make the Pro Bowl. I'd say there's a chance he does with the dip in production of offense this year, but I just wanted to say I think he deserves his flowers this year.
Yeah, and Pittman's been a real fun storyline, right? Particularly with Minshew. They seem to have a pretty good chemistry out there on the field. He's a high target guy for Minshew. And I would have been curious to see what the production would have been like alongside Richardson for an entire season, whether for better or for worse. I know they had some slower games out of the gate, and part of that could just be the offense coming together, obviously new head coach. But yeah, Pittman's a great pick there.
Yeah, and then so for my last pick, this is the one who I think without a doubt should make the Pro Bowl, but I just don't think it will, unfortunately, due to the nature of the NFL and how much popularity can sway a vote. But Jabril Peppers. Now, this is a guy who's had a pretty tumultuous career. Obviously, drafted by Cleveland after being a Heisman frontrunner in his last year at Michigan, known for his versatility. Hasn't really seen that in the NFL. Goes to Cleveland, is traded in the Odell trade just a year into his career, and then quickly replaced by guys like Logan Ryan and Julian Love in New York. So they let go of him, and he goes to New England. And his first year was anything but successful. Kind of saw some strides of what made him great in Michigan, but this year he's really just evolved into, in my opinion, one of the best safeties in the league. This has kind of been a benchmark of Belichick. From Rodney Harrison to Devin McCourty, he always has reliable back-end players. And now he has a guy like Kyle Duggar playing next to him. And so they played him a little bit in the slot this year. They played him a little bit of everywhere, a little bit of free safety, a little bit of in the box safety. So they're getting back to what made him so dynamic as a player, and that's his versatility. He also is allowing only a 54 quarterback rating in his zone, has only allowed 1 touchdown and only 17 receptions all year. Really just having his best year as well as having a career high in interceptions. He has just proven to be one of the more reliable players in this offense. He's also returned punts for them when they needed to. He's kind of become, and the Patriots defense has been unbelievable the last few weeks. It's just, again, all the issue with the Patriots lies in the offense, right? They allowed under 10 points or under for the last 3 weeks, besides last week against Pittsburgh, where they finally got a win, in part due to the great play by him. He had an interception in that game and played great coverage throughout the game. And I just think it's a shame that we aren't talking about him because he's on a 3-win team, but I really just think it's more impressive him being on a 3-win team. This team is so bad, yet, the cream always rises to the top. That's what we're seeing with Jabril Peppers, and I'm just so glad for him. Had a little bit of technical difficulties with this one, but this is going to be the end of the 9th episode of season 3 of the B-Sides of Sports. We thank you guys for everything and sticking around with us throughout this show. Like I said early in the show, all of our links are down in the description below. That is for our Spotify link if you want to listen to this just through audio. Our TikTok and the YouTube Shorts now are also on this channel as well, which you can look out for, or go to the Shorts tab at the top of your YouTube. And with that, we just thank you guys for everything once again. We appreciate the support, and we will see you guys next time. Later.